Thank you very much. Thank you for that very warm introduction, and thank you as well for that acknowledgement of where we are. And I also want to acknowledge the land on where we meet and the First Nations people on whose land that we do meet tonight. I want to also acknowledge my own people, the Wiradjuri, the Kamilaroi and the Darawal. And I would not be here without them. And my grandfather, who gave me the gift of faith and the thirst and the hunger for justice, to speak when others would rather that we did not. I want to acknowledge the Reverend Dr. Jeff Broughton, who was my PhD supervisor and has been a wonderful interlocutor for me, who has helped to inspire me to ask new questions about myself and questions about my society. And my cousin has just walked into the room, Tila, who's all the way from Australia, and Tila is also a Wiradjuri and a Whale woman and a lawyer, and was just talking to her grandmother, she told me, my great aunt. So it's so good to have family. Well, she's a good reason. I was asked just yesterday about what I thought of this place, this School of Divinity, and particularly the work of Miroslav and his team. Now, Miroslav has been a great guide to me as I've wrestled with the questions of exclusion and embrace, of how to live with the weight of our history and to remember rightly. Miroslav, in his book, What Life Worth Living, echoes something in my own Wiradjuri culture. In our phrase, Yindyamara Winangana, which means to live with respect in a world worth living in. Not just respect, but respect worthy of the world that we would like to make. And that spirit is with me always, and I know that that spirit is here in this place as well. What do I think of this school? I think here you have created a soft place to ask hard questions, and how we need soft places to ask hard questions in a world of too many jagged edges. In this world where we don't afford each other the love, kindness and generosity to ask those hard questions. We want to load up our words, use them against each other, to speak always in judgment. And when I ponder our world, as I stand here tonight to try to speak about history, the memory of wounds, and exile, a place of home beyond home, a place of truth, grace, and silence, I wonder if I can even find those words when so many in our world have nothing but a scream. How can I stand here tonight and speak of things of love and forgiveness when the cries of mothers mourning their dead children are swallowed up in a blizzard of 24-hour news? How meaningless are the words of polite rooms like this when in Gaza and Israel there is fear and trembling and tears? How can I speak of God? Where is God? When people right now may need water more than they need God. Certainly they need water more than they need my words. And there are so many words, too many people speaking so loudly and saying so very little. There is just so much noise. There are so many people raising their flags or their fists to stand with one side or against another. And I know that there is a time for anger, and we should be angry when we see such wanton loss of life and such injustice. We should be. And there are those who are genuinely moved, wanting to say, we are with you. There are those with their heads bowed in lament and vigil, and I stand with them. But there is something else I see. I see a spectacle. I also see grandstanding In this vain, know-all certainty, Instagram, TikTok, identity-yearning age, I see it in all of its sad desperation. The war has become all of our war, an extension of our culture wars, left versus right, right against left. We seek to own the suffering of those who can't escape the rockets or the bullets or the bombs. We want to put a claim on them and appropriate their pain for our politics. We project ourselves onto the suffering of others, and in our grasping, I fear that we diminish that very suffering itself. Why? I can't help but think it says something about the emptiness of modernity, this imagined place beyond blood and history. Why do we seek vicarious meaning in the misery of others? Modernity has stripped the divine from our lives. It is a disenchanted age. Charles Taylor is right to say that God is just one of many options right now, and I fear for far too many, particularly in what we call the West, the least of the options. God doesn't speak to us, politics does. A winner-takes-all battle of political identities. The protests I watch on my screen, the forests of newsprint, the volume of commentary on our televisions are beginning to feel like it has gone beyond the tragedy, the obscenity, the slaughter of the war itself. I dare not even look at social media. I can only imagine the depravity there in that place of phony war, war fought with poisonous words, people shooting in the dark, too often an indiscriminate hate fest. It is grotesque, and even more grotesque when we consider that so many of these people in their safety and their certainty have never known war, and I thank God for that. I do know war. As a reporter, I have covered war. I know enough about war to know that the truth of war could not be further from our noise. War is not captured in headlines. It's not a debating point. It is not a news panel show. It is not a political tactic. It's not a banner writ large at a protest. War is so much smaller than that. That's the truth of war. It can be so small. In war, people mark the passing days with the small things. In war, we still reach for the tender touch. We pass a cup or we share a meal. That there is too often so little to share makes that tender touch more tender still. To know that each gentle moment could be the last means that those in war linger still in those small moments. I know, I have seen how intimate war is. It is blood-smeared faces. It is choking dust. It is a child's hand in the hand of a parent. It is people carrying bandages and dispensing medicine. It is shivering cold and belly-aching hunger. I have been up close enough to war to have blood on my shoes, and I will never stop the nightmares. What words are there for that? As a reporter, I was always conscious that I was an intruder. I owed the suffering people my witness, and sometimes that meant turning the camera off. Perhaps silence would be better now. I suspect in the silence we may get closer to God. I have struggled with what we are seeing. Today the noise is all Gaza and Israel, but the wars continue in Ukraine, Ethiopia, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, Central African Republic, just some of the civil wars, proxy wars, and other wars being fought throughout our world. There are so many conflicts that the news cameras cannot capture them all. So Gaza and Israel now bring all of our wars of our world into focus. I know that news cannot hold the weight of this suffering. There is news speak, there is political speak. We know those words: defence, proportionality, law, democracy. In the news and politics, people are asked to condemn, disavow, support. I know there is a place for those words, those questions, but they are not the words I seek. What are the words of God in this moment? Those words of God that sound so much older. Think of those words. Let them sit on your tongue. Lament, grace, justice, affliction, love. Those words that buckle and strain. We don't hear those words from politicians or journalists. To those words of God, I add our word of God, Yindyamara. I mentioned before that it means respect, but that word alone does not speak to the depth of Yindyamara. It comes from a respect for our land. It is a world that emerges from thousands of years on our land. Yindyamara calls us to be responsible, not only for what we do, but for what others do. It is a hard word to say, a hard word to hear, and an even harder word to live. How can we be responsible for what others do? Am I responsible for murder? How could I possibly put that weight on people enduring war in our world today? Of course I cannot. It is a word that is out of reach, as all the hard words are: lament, affliction, love. If they were easy, we could chant them in protests, but they are quiet, solemn words. Am I responsible for what others do? Yes. I am not culpable, but I am implicated. I live in the world, I breathe in this air. That such horror is possible in our world is on us. Sometimes being responsible for the other is to speak truth to the other when they don't want to hear it. Yindyamara. We hear it in Isaiah's prophecy. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Jesus the Lamb had done nothing wrong, yet went to his death for all sin. But right now, let me say it again, how can we speak of God? To those grieving, God must seem so far off. People are having their way now. Politics and violence are having their way right now. I've wanted to retreat from this all. To speak seems so indulgent, and yet tonight I must confront this head on. Anyone who tries to find God in this risks getting it so wrong. To speak invites being claimed, enlisted in someone's political fight. Words, even uttered with caution, care and love, can so easily and mischievously be bent out of shape. I will not seek my shelter behind the certainty of politics. I will, with Yindyamara, offer myself to humanity, and I will not be told I must choose between the suffering innocents. Some may want to put a value on life. I hear them. I hear some speak more loudly, draped in one flag or another, mourning the dead of one side or another. But I know this: mothers cry the same tears, and children's souls are all sacred. And I know war is unholy. And here I am trying to speak holy words. But then I remind myself that because God may seem distant, God is still there. In war, I have seen people pray. I have seen them hold their beads and their holy books. In those intimate moments of war, they pray. And a prayer right now in our world where we try to banish God, our prayer might be our great act of exile. A soft place to ask hard questions. I stand here tonight as an exile. I am far from home in another country half a world away, yet at home is also far away. I am one of those people pulled out of time. I am born of a rupture of history. The exile is cast out. Perhaps the exile sets out. Sometimes, maybe more often, the exile never moves, but the world moves around us. This is the curse of our fate. Time is always moving, yet somewhere the clock is stopped. I share solidarity with those others out of place and out of time, and there are those in this room tonight for whom home may be far off. Some for whom home is a place they have never seen. There are those whose homes were lost in war. Some may think of exile as being without a home. No. The exile always carries home. Home is in memory. It is in story. It is in our ancestral blood. I met a man once when, as a reporter for CNN, I was covering the war in Iraq. This man had fled his home in Palestine, escaping war. Now war had followed him again. We spoke of our stories and what had led us here. He disappeared into a room and returned with a glass bottle of dirt. He put it in my hand. "This is my home," he said. I can feel the earth beneath my feet here tonight. My earth. My home is always with me. Where is home? It is by a river, under a tree. I can hear the birds and the wind through the trees. Home is knowing my family is close, beating in my heart. I could say I am from Australia, but that is not the home I speak of. Australia is the country I am from, a place for which I have affection. I am protective of it. Perhaps you could say I love it. But home? No. Home is the light trace of a nation, obscured by the thick lines of Australia. It is Wiradjuri. It is Gamilaroi. It is Dharawal. Old names for a people of an ancient land. These are my bloodlines, what we call our song lines. When I say those words, I know what they mean. When I say Australia, I am still discovering what that might mean. Tonight I will talk to you about exile, about a home lost, yet a home forever close. I will talk about history and its hold on us. I will talk about God in a world where we drive out God. I will embrace my exile, a place to breathe in God and touch those made in God's image. I was born into a people cast out. The Australian nation had excised us from its page. Australia's constitution subtracted us from the nation. It would not be until 1967, 4 years after my birth, that we would be included in the census. We lived on missions and reserves, segregated, excluded, where we were expected to die out. The phrase used at the time was to smooth the dying pillow. When we were lifted from the control of the state, we were tossed onto the margins, uncounted and unloved. My childhood memories are not of home, but of the road. When I close my eyes, I still see a young boy huddled with his brothers and sister in the back seat of a car, curled up with each other to keep warm. I'm always staring out the window, watching the white posts go by, marking off every mile of our journey across lands of my ancestors, now ringed off and fenced. And I know what is out there. Endlessness, not time invented, but time permanent. Time that does not run in a straight line. In my car, in the darkness, there is life out there, all around me. It was the safest place in the world for me and my family. Inside that car, nothing could touch us. The rest of the world out there, and in here, just us, a little family with no home except the one we made together. For hours I watched my mother and father in the front seat. Silence mostly. The quiet broken by a soft word here or there. I have been around the world and back, and yet a part of me, maybe it is the truest and best part of me, has never left that time and place. This was our journey to nowhere, circling a nation that I could see but not touch. Hosea 11:1 says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." As a child, I felt the call of God, surrounded by people of exile who had been abandoned and who in their abandonment cried out to God. Men of God had led raiding parties against my people. Men of God had described us as the most degraded of the human race. Other people of God sought to save us from what these men of God would do to us. And we prayed. My people prayed with the power known only to those who have nothing left but their prayers. Jesus did not come to our land in boats from England. My uncle, who preached in our mission church, told me Jesus was an ancestor. We felt our suffering in the suffering on the cross. Our mission church was the church of the forsaken. Our hymns were songs of suffering and shame. Our cross was rugged and heavy. We preached from the books of Job and Isaiah. Isaiah 59:14. Justice is driven back and righteousness stands at a distance. Truth has stumbled in the streets. Honesty cannot enter. Our courts oppose the righteous and justice is nowhere. In the book of Lamentations, we felt the abandonment and horror of the ransacked Jerusalem. How deserted lies the city. Bitterly she weeps at night. There is no one to comfort her. Her foes have become her masters. This is why I weep and my eyes overflow with tears. As the roads to Zion mourned, so did our land. The pain was in the land itself. We too cried out, "Why, God? How, God?" I've never asked if God is real, but I have wondered, where is God? How can a God of love allow such suffering? This is the cry of the afflicted everywhere. For a First Nations person and a Christian, there is no more chilling prayer than the prayer of the forsaken. The French philosopher and Christian mystic Simone Weil called affliction the chill of indifference. It is, she said, the metallic chill that freezes all those it touches down to the depths of their souls. Indifference. Indifference bites harder than hate. It is callous. It is a shrug so cold that it taunts our humanity. My people know the darkness. We know we live in the world, the fallen world of our free will, a world where evil is real, a world where God can seem so distant. Like the people of old Jerusalem, I lament, and I know that while there is a judgment on those who do evil, in my affliction there is a judgment on me. What do I do while suffering? Do I fall to resentment and vengeance? Resentment may appear more just. It may have more virtue. It may be more equal to the crimes than love or forgiveness. In affliction, I am presented with a choice: surrender to the hopelessness brought upon us, or to reach for hope. I was raised by people with hope in God, a hard hope. The despairing hope of a people forsaken, a people who wait for God's justice. I think of hope in the words of W.E.B. Du Bois when looking at his newborn son and pondering a world where the colour of his skin would be his destiny. Where is hope, he wondered, behind the veil? Within the veil he was born, he wrote, and there within shall he live, a Negro and a Negro's son, holding in that little head bitterly the unbowed pride of a hunted race, clinging with that tiny, dimpled hand to a hope not hopeless, but unhopeful. And seeing with those bright, wondering eyes that peer into my soul a land whose freedom is to us a mockery and whose liberty a lie. Du Bois spoke to me. A hope not hopeless, but unhopeful. We would have every reason to not hope, but to fall to hopelessness would be our sin. This is the core of my faith. I ask, where are you, God? But I can hear my uncle reply, it's not for me to ask questions of God, but God to ask questions of me. I read the scriptures through agony and faith, and I pray for God's revelation to me. I read those who have struggled under the weight of their own affliction. Jürgen Moltmann says, those who follow the cross, they know the desolation of the God who is far off. Simone Weil said that God withdraws from the world. It is this space that allows us to live. In this space we suffer. But I find that it is in God's absence that God lives. It is the fact that the world is imperfect and at times evil that God can be revealed. For what would God mean in a world of perfection? These are the things that Simone Weil contemplated. God may leave the world, but God leaves a trace of love. God waits. We are God's lament. We are God's suffering. The crucified Christ took all that suffering upon his body and died and rose. As African-American theologian James Cone said, Christ is the reconciler, the liberator, sent from God to give wholeness to broken and wretched lives. And God is love. Bell Hooks said, we have been wounded in the places where we would know love. Wounded in the places where we would know love. But still we look for love. And only love, she said, can give us the strength to go forward in the midst of heartbreak and misery. The sun will rise tomorrow, even on a scorched earth, and we will rise to face light or darkness, to choose. These things are hard. Faith is hard. It is tested and it is a mystery. I can understand why some cannot believe, but I do. And that makes this question even more brutal. Where is God? And God answers, I am there with the afflicted. The God I know is with God's people, those in the image of God, because God is love. They says, only the afflicted know the truth. All others lie. The poet and Nobel laureate Czeslaw Milosz knew about truth and affliction. He said he wrote from the other Europe that descended into the darkness of the 20th century. Milosz would live in the lands in between, shadow lands, like my other Australia. He said he was a Lithuanian to whom it was not given to be a Lithuanian. He wrote in Polish and lived in France and the United States, trying to reclaim our humanity from our taste for barbarity. Milosz speaks to me as the poet of exile. He knows that we meet in the spaces where flags and borders and anthems and nations do not define us. He knew there was a truth in suffering. He wrote, I was not separated from people. Grief and pity joined us. We forget, I kept saying, that we are all children of the King, for where we come from there is no division into yes and no, into is, was, and will be. This is what Johann Baptist Metz called a landscape of cries. As a reporter, I went out into the world to find those joined in grief and pity. It wasn't just the violence and the misery that I reported on, but the stories of these people which connected deeply with my own. When I looked into the eyes of a child or a parent in a refugee camp, I saw the eyes of my own family. Reporting the world was my way of trying to understand myself. I recall walking into a music shop in Kabul. The shop had only just reopened after the fall of the Taliban. The Taliban had banned music and slaughtered musicians. Here in this shop I saw an old guitar, beaten up with rusted strings. I took it down, tuned it, and started picking out a song. The owner picked up one of his traditional instruments, a rabab, and started playing along with me. Here we were, two men, one Christian and Aboriginal, the other Afghan and Muslim. We read from different books. We spoke in different languages, but together we communicated through music. I learned that the guitar had been left behind by a Red Army soldier after the Soviet invasion. In that one guitar, history, time, war, and God collapsed into a shared space, our borderland. Like the people of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, or China, I had been shaped by history. My family's story was one of invasion, occupation, colonisation, and oppression. We had been left on the margins, excluded, impoverished, and imprisoned. I knew how easy it was for small people everywhere to feel the humiliation of history, to feel angry and grow bitter at the still opened wound. I chose to live away from Australia because it weighed down on me. I didn't want to feel as though I had to fight the battles of my ancestors, yet wherever I went, my history travelled with me. I could never be free from its shackles, so I sought out those stories that would speak to me in the lives of others. I could ask the questions of myself that burned inside me. If history does live in us, and I know that to be true, then aren't we doomed? Those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Is that just another soothing lie? I know that those who remember the past too well or too badly repeat it over and over and over again. The truth does not always set you free. The truth can also handcuff us to a history we cannot change. This is the return of history, a fever, a rage. I see it all around our world. It grows where injustice lives. This anger festers. History can be the poison in our blood, what Czeslaw Milosz called the memory of our wounds. I have stood in bombed-out marketplaces where the blood boils. It is so hot it gurgles under my feet. It is twisted metal and the stench of burning flesh. I remember once at a double bus bombing in Beersheba in Israel, a scene of dead bodies, broken glass, and there among it all was a small packet of chocolate teddy bear biscuits, and on the box, the bloodied handprint of a child. These are the things that rattle me the most. The thought that here was a child just like my children, on a bus ride with her parents, eating biscuits and talking excitedly, and then, in an instant, gone. Why? Standing there that night, the only answer I had was that the world was insane, that we do cling to our tribes and we wage a historical blood feud without end. How do we find forgiveness in this world? I have sought it in faith, in exile. I have looked for that space where our grief may connect us, not poison us. The Native American poet Diane Glancy writes, It is a fragile gate, the opening of faith. We enter into it with all of our human frailty, and our sin and faith ask of us more than our rationality. We are asked to believe. In our relationship with God, we find new relationship with each other, relationship beyond the fixed, bounded identities. As Miroslav Volf would put it, we are asked to embrace what we would otherwise exclude. We become, he says, porous, bounded, yet permeable. In letting others in, we do not lose ourselves, but enrich ourselves. Volf says that in the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, we find love and reconciliation, an unconditional embrace of humanity. The willingness to forgive is unequivocal. Jesus cries out on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus would ask for forgiveness even for those who would want him dead. Miroslav says Christ justifies the ungodly. We must love our enemies as we love our neighbours. We are all with sin, morally divided. Sin, he says, is both the rot deep in our souls and a prowling beast of exclusion that holds a captive of entire societies, cultures, and communities. And we know that faith itself can be the source of exclusion and violence. This is the faith that hardens our identities. As Miroslav says, a religion thus configured ends up justifying the group's practice of exclusion and its deployment of violence. Exclusionary forms of the Christian faith are distortions. Instead, we must act with will, the will to embrace. Of course, Miroslav speaks from personal experience, living through the wars of Yugoslavia in the 1990s and being asked by the great theologian Jürgen Moltmann, "Can you embrace a Chetnik?" The Serbian fighters, he writes, were sowing desolation in my native country, herding people into concentration camps, raping women, burning down churches, destroying cities. What was Volf's answer? No. But then he said, but as a follower of Christ, I think I should be able to. As a person of faith, I also ask myself the hard questions of forgiveness. As an Indigenous Australian, can I forgive the sins, the crimes against us? No, but I must. Jürgen Moltmann taught me something too. In his book, The Crucified God, he challenged us to become exiles, to seek non-identity and empty ourselves so that we might find truth in the suffering of the cross. By emptying ourselves, we find a new self. This, he said, is the exodus from the blinded society that has repressed its pain and can no longer feel the pain of others. He called out the church that had become too satisfied with the religious tolerance of the frigid society. The church had made a dishonourable peace and become sterile. It is a risk to step outside yourself or your society to find a true identity in non-identity. We don't find truth, love, justice, or forgiveness in isolation. We find it in each other. Moltmann says, in exile, one seeks home. In alienation, one seeks identity. Love is revealed in hatred, peace in conflict. But does love speak louder than hatred in our world? Do we seek peace in conflict? Is forgiveness itself now a weakness? I fear so. Where we should whisper over history, we shout. We form our tribes and prosecute our old hatreds. There is too much of the wrong identity, the identity that excludes and sets our world ablaze. For 4 decades, I reported from a world dead to God and alive to too much humanity. The Exile seeks to say no to the borders, the flags, the sterile churches, and the identity slogans. I think of Simone Weil. The exile knows the truth of affliction. Simone Weil is the thinker who never flinches, who never blinks at the truth of the cross. She says the lesson of suffering is to teach me that I am nothing. To teach me that I am nothing. I wonder what she meant. And then she said that Jesus was crucified because he was only God. Only God. Nothing. Nailed to a cross and abandoned, just the chill of indifference. In modernity, God is only God. God is dead and we have killed him. I must love being nothing, Weil says. How horrible it would be if I was something. We live in a world of so much something, so much politics, so much identity, so much history, so much vengeance. We live in a world bludgeoned by too much something where God is only God, and the sacred silence is shattered by our noise, our torrent of words that hammer on God's door. Soren Kierkegaard tells us the bird keeps silent and suffers. He considers the Sermon on the Mount and the call of Jesus for people to put away earthly cares and become like the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. Kierkegaard writes, the bird is not free of suffering, but the silent bird frees itself from what makes the suffering more burdensome, from the misunderstood sympathy of others, frees itself from what makes the suffering last longer, from all the talk of suffering, frees itself from what makes the suffering into something worse than suffering, from the sin of impatience and sadness. From the lily and the bird, let us learn silence, or let us learn to keep silent, because in silence we may find God. I recently retreated into silence. I joined other First Nations people in Australia in a sacred silence. Silence was all we had left after Australia had robbed us of our voice. Our people had gone to the Australian nation to ask them to hear us. We sought a voice in our constitution, a constitution in which we are still voiceless. Australia is the only current or former Commonwealth country not to have a treaty with Indigenous peoples. There is no recognition of extant Indigenous sovereignty. We suffer under what has been called the powerlessness of torment. We are the most imprisoned and impoverished people in the land. We took a case to a referendum of the Australian people, and the Australian people answered no. Not one of Australia's 6 states said yes. It was not just a no, it was a resounding no. This no echoed across 2 centuries of suffering. We felt again the chill of indifference. We are nothing, and we shared this with God. My silence and my prayers are my exile. It is my home and the home I share with all the people of the borderlands. Here is the truth. Don't we all live in the borderlands? Grief and pity join us all. Is this naive? Maybe. I know the certainty of politics roars so much loudly right now. I know that anger and pain speak louder than love right now. But in my exile, I leave room for silence so God may speak. Simone Weil says, when we cry out for an answer and God and it is not given us, it is then we touch the silence of God. In my exile, I shrink. I shrink into nothing. Only God. In that nothing, in that surrender of the self, I hope that I can join myself to others. In my exile, I offer Yindyamara. In my language, Mandangur. Thank you.
Hi, my
Hi.
name's Madeline.
Hi.
So recently you've taken a step back from
Yes.
the media, and you've also spoken about how there's a lot of, so much coverage in the media about the current conflicts that it inflates. You obviously said it better yourself. Do you believe that the media should continue like you did and take a step back, or do you find that it's important to voice opinions like yours as you've done in this lecture?
I think we have to choose the place and the time to speak. Think we need to be aware that just because we can does not mean we must. Just because the television is on, we don't have to speak all the time. I think there is a rush to speak and a rush to judgment. I think we fill our space with noise when we may need to fill it with a more profound silence. When we speak, we need to be aware of how those words will land and where they will be heard and whether people are ready to hear them. That's why we took our silence after the referendum. Australia wasn't ready for those words. And when we speak those words, they come at us with the force of people who do not want to hear. The attacks that my family have endured, the attacks that other Aboriginal people have endured, led me to walk away from working in the media because I believed I was complicit in generating the volume of noise that leads to that hatred. We are the poison in the bloodstream. We are the poison in the bloodstream. And I made a promise to myself that I will speak into the spaces that elevate me and find a space to be able to hold the truth of the words that I spoke tonight, that are not reduced or diminished by anyone's agenda, that are not reduced or diminished by the concentration of coverage and time that we get in 24/7 news. There are spaces to speak. There are times to speak. And there are times to know when the words are not going to be heard. And in silence we sit and we hold space so that at some time people may be ready to hear them.
Jerry, and then over here.
Hi, thank you. Jerry Streets, member of the faculty.
Hi, Jerry.
How does one know when the retreat into silence becomes restorative rather than perhaps an act of feeling defeated?
That's a really good question. I think sometimes we feel as if we have to speak because we are compelled to. The times demand it. I asked something of myself, and I asked myself after I stepped away from media, by my actions or my words, am I complicit in the perpetuation of violence? I ask myself that all the time. That is the measurement of my intervention. I know that by hosting television programs and platforming some of the people who are platformed in the interests of journalistic balance or neutrality, that I am amplifying lies and hatred. And I am contributing to the perpetuation of violence. That is the truth. And I had to step away from that. Silence is not weakness. Silence may be the strength. Jesus stayed silent at his own trial. He knew what he was going to face and knew that the cost of that. But the silence still speaks to us today. Silence can be a place where we wait for the wisdom and the words to speak through us rather than someone else setting the terms of that speech. There are times to go into the wilderness. For me, there was a time to go back to my country and sit by a river in my silence so that I can be here to speak, or so that I can speak and write in my own country. We know that it takes an enormous toll on us, and we have to be mindful of that. I have a responsibility to my family. My parents do not deserve the hatred and vitriol that they've endured because I've spoken. My children deserve the right to live without hatred. Right now, there is a court case in Australia because someone was threatening to kill us. There are times when I step away for the safety of my family. But I wait, and when I feel that the sacred silence will speak through me, when I find what Wittgenstein called the quiet gravity, then I will speak again to elevate who we are rather than to perpetuate the ongoing conflict.
There's a mic.
Just a quick, of course, profound thanks, but also wondering where we could read about you, and do you have a book we can read?
Mm-hmm. I have several books, and
Great.
I'm working on another one at the moment, which is about this. It is about silence. It is about claiming space. It is about owning our time rather than time owning us. It is about being able to live with our history, but not to be poisoned by it, and to always be truthful to justice. I'm working on that right now. The last book I wrote was called The Queen is Dead, which emerged out of the death of Queen Elizabeth, which was a cathartic moment for our people because of what the crown represented. And when I wrote that book, and when I appeared with Tila on television, and we spoke about the truth, no embellishment, no opinion, the truth, what happened in the name of the crown, we were attacked. So you can read that book, which I think is a journey into my history and how I live with it. It's also a journey into where I find love and how I can find grace and give back grace and love to those who have no love for us. So The Queen is Dead would be a good place to start, I think.
Thank you.
Jeff Broughton, my accent gives me away. I promise I'm not trying to do a Maltman here. This should be an easier question. But it looks like you found a home in a soft place with hard questions.
It's always been there, Jeff. My country is a soft place. Other people brought the hardness. They brought the death. They poisoned the rivers. They cut down the trees. They locked up our people. They took the heads of our people. We didn't bring the hardness to our land. Our land's a soft place to fall. And I love that. And that's a soft place where I can ask those questions. And I know that God is in that space. We have a word for God, Bayami, our word for God. Jesus was not unknown to us. The first fleet, the British didn't bring Jesus to our country. We knew those stories. We knew our place with God. It's always been a soft place because of my history and because of what our people still endure today, and because I know that what we endure, others endure. That forces me to ask hard questions.
We can take one more question in the back.
Hi, good evening. I've so enjoyed your words. I listened intently to all of them.
Thank you very much.
Even though I did listen intently, I still was kind of trying to discern fully what your stance was when we talked about sitting in that reverent silence, that painful period. And the reason I'm asking specifically, as someone who's been directly impacted by settler colonialism, I think a lot of really learned, reverent individuals have sat in painful silence for 75 years. And at what point are we, you talked about the coldness of indifference, that really resonated with me.
That
It's
you end
more
up being
painful.
indifferent in the silence.
I
Yeah.
can't be indifferent about all the,
Yes.
the babies currently,
Exactly.
being, and so how do we move in truth, resonate with, but some of us have been aware of this long before October 6th and talking about it like weekly with our families,
Yeah.
Even if I'm not personally Muslim. And so in closing, I heard Dean Sterling not trying to turn into a mini lecture, but unfortunately, my last point was some people who aren't as directly impacted by settler colonialism and have sat in reverent silence for 75 years, by not speaking out on it, there are some people who are just taking a seat at the conversation who are unfortunately conflating anti-Zionism, which is imperialist, with anti-Semitism, and those two are not tantamount.
Yeah. And I think that's what you've identified is part of the problem of our age, where something can be conflated with something else, and we seek to take people's words and bend them out of shape. I certainly couldn't be silent for 75 years. That would be impossible for me. But I think I always come back to Yinjimarra. It is a hard thing, but this is what my ancestors demand of me. And Yinjimarra is not captive to the news agenda, not captive to the events of the day. It's not something that is comparable to anything in the idea of the West. It is the effort to hold space for all. And when you consider that we have held that space for people who came to our country and severed the heads of our people. And I've asked my father, how? And he said, son, because what is important is not who we are, but where we are. And if you think about that, that turns the entire history of modernity, the 300-year project of the sovereignty of the self, that has led us to the world that we are in today, with all of the colonialism and all of the history of that violence. It has led us to this point. And my father's wisdom to say where we are, if I give up where we are, if I cede the love of that country that I hold even for the people who have done the worst to us, then I stop being who I am. And that's not easy. It's not easy. And it is not without, doesn't mean it is without judgment. It is with the implication that we are all in this, and it happens in our places, and we breathe that air, all of us. At any time we could be there, and to try to hold that space for all. And that's my calling. That's the soft space to ask the hard questions. If I betray Yinjimarra and give in to the appeal of anybody to voice something for somebody else because they may want me to, or they may demand something, I have surrendered to the inheritance of my ancestors. That's what I carry with me. Thank you.
We have a reception, and you can continue this conversation by just going up to the common room, right up the stairway here. But I'd ask before we do that, I want to say thank you to your Doke Pater, as we would say, for coming, and for your cousin.
Yes.
For coming. We're honored that both of you have joined Stan and to be with us tonight. I want to say thank you for your courage to speak and for your courage to be silent. And I will always remember the phrase, a soft place to ask hard questions. And I hope that's what this community can be, is a soft place where we can have very hard questions discussed. So Stan, we thank you.
Thank you.
Not just for your lecture, but for the life that